All right, today we are digging into one of the greatest, most bonkers stories in the history of archaeology. It's a tale of obsession, of incredible treasure, and really about that blurry line between myth and reality. We're going to talk about how one man, totally driven by a childhood dream, went out and found a city that most people thought was just a fairy tale. He basically dug up a myth.
You know, for centuries, the Trojan War was just a story. An epic, for sure, told by Homer. You know the one. It's got Achilles and Hector, the Trojan horse, Helen of Troy, the whole shebang. But the city of Troy itself? Nah. Most serious scholars thought it was pure fiction, just a cool, mythical backdrop for a great story. But what if they were wrong? What if Troy was a real place, buried under centuries of dirt, just waiting?
Well, that one question became a total, all-consuming obsession for one guy in particular. Heinrich Schliemann. This was a super wealthy German businessman who, and I mean this, against all academic advice, against all common sense, believed that Homer's Iliad wasn't just a story. To him, it was a history book, a literal guide, and he was going to bet his life and his massive fortune to prove it.
So, to really get what drove Schliemann, you gotta understand the man himself. His quest for Troy, it didn't start with a shovel in the ground. No, it started way back, with a childhood promise and this just, frankly, superhuman level of determination. It was one heck of a long road from being dirt poor to standing on the plains of ancient Troy.
These are Schliemann's own words right here. And wow, do they capture his whole vibe. The guy started with absolutely nothing. He lived in what he called a wretched garret and barely scraped by. But here's the thing about him. He didn't see misery as a trap. He saw it as fuel. For him, working like a madman was the only way up and out.
And just look at this timeline. It is absolutely staggering. I mean, he starts as a poor grocer's apprentice. He comes up with his own wild method for learning languages, basically reading aloud constantly, writing essays, and memorizing them. Using this, he teaches himself English and French in like 6 months each. Then, and get this, he masters Russian in a mind-boggling 6 weeks. His method? He hired a local guy who didn't know a single word of any language Schliemann knew, just so he'd have a captive audience to recite Russian too. It's insane, but it worked. This linguistic superpower made him a hugely successful merchant, and boom, he becomes a millionaire. But look at that last point. He deliberately waited to learn ancient Greek, Homer's language, because he was afraid it would distract him from making money. That's how laser-focused he was on his ultimate goal.
And you really have to get this, all of it. The languages, the businesses, the millions, it was all just a means to an end. Every single move was calculated. It was all about getting him one step closer to his real life's work, to finally stand on the plains of Troy with a shovel in his hand. He was going to find Homer's city, period.
Okay, so with his pockets full and his brain crammed with every line of Homer, Schliemann finally turns his attention to the actual dig. But that led to the first huge problem. Where exactly was Troy?
At the time, all the big-shot scholars had a favorite spot, a place called Bunarbashi. And, okay, it seemed plausible enough, but Schliemann, he's rereading his copy of the Iliad for the millionth time, and he's just not convinced. He's like, no way, Bunarbashi is way too far from the sea. The Greek soldiers couldn't have run back and forth that fast. His eyes landed on this other spot, a big man-made looking hill called Hissarlik. To him, that was the place. It just fit Homer's descriptions perfectly. So what'd he do? He basically told the experts, thanks, but no thanks, and followed his gut and his copy of Homer.
So in 1871, he funnels his fortune into Hissarlik. And listen, this was not some delicate scholarly dig with little brushes and trowels, oh no. This was an industrial-scale operation. We're talking a workforce of over 100 men, carts, tools. He basically declared war on that hill, totally determined to force its secrets out into the open.
And what he found was pretty astonishing. Hissarlik wasn't just one city. It was like a layer cake of cities, built one right on top of the ruins of the other, over thousands of years. This idea is super important in archaeology. It's called stratigraphy. So near the top, yeah, he found a later Greek colony. But as he dug deeper and deeper, we're talking over 50 feet down to bedrock. He was literally traveling back in time through different civilizations. He was on the hunt for one layer in particular, a burnt city, the one he was sure was destroyed by the Greeks in the Trojan War.
Now, his method, well, delicate is not the word. He was totally convinced that Homer's Troy had to be one of the oldest cities, way down at the bottom. So what does he do? He carves this gigantic trench. We're talking over 130 feet wide, straight through the center of the hill.
He literally bulldozed through history to get to the prize he was sure was waiting at the bottom. For a couple of years, the work was just brutal. He was finding stuff, sure. Pottery shards, some old walls, weapons. Important, yeah, but it wasn't exactly the legendary treasure of a king. And then, in May of 1873, everything, and I mean everything, changed. He's digging near what he's decided is the main city wall when he sees it, a glint of gold. In his diary, he writes about how this huge wall above him looked like it could collapse at any second. But the sight of all that treasure, it made him reckless. He quickly told all his workers to take a break. He wanted this find all to himself. And then he and his wife, Sophie, just frantically started digging the stuff out of the dirt with a knife. Can you imagine? And he finds this incredible hoard right next to a structure he triumphantly declares is the Scheliemann Gate, the famous main gate of Troy from the Iliad. For Schliemann, this was the ultimate proof. This was it. He hadn't just found the city, he believed he had found the actual royal treasure of King Priam himself, probably hidden away as the city was being destroyed.
And the stuff he found, it was just breathtaking. There was a solid gold cup that weighed over a pound, copper shields, silver vases, daggers, and most famously, these two spectacular golden diadems, just dripping with thousands of tiny gold idols. This wasn't just archaeology anymore. This was legend made real. And of course, in a now famous move, he had his wife Sophie put on the jewelry, creating one of the most iconic, and let's be honest, controversial photos in the history of archaeology.
Which, brings us to the messy part. See, Schliemann had a permit from the Turkish government, and that agreement said he had to share his findings. But this treasure, King Priam's treasure, there was no way he was giving that up. So he secretly packed the whole thing into baskets and smuggled it out of the country. And you really have to hear his justification for this. In his mind, he wasn't stealing. Nope, he saw it as a rescue mission. He was saving these priceless artifacts for science, and he was absolutely 100% sure that the whole civilized world would thank him for it. I mean, that quote just perfectly captures the kind of guy he was. A mix of total brilliance, unshakable passion, and, well, a whole lot of arrogance. So, Schliemann announces his find, and the world is just stunned. The guy did the impossible. He found Troy. He found the treasure. But the story doesn't stop there. As the dust from all the excitement started to settle, a much more complicated truth began to surface. And here's the big twist in the story. Schliemann was right about the where. Hissarlik is, almost without a doubt, the site of ancient Troy. But he was dead wrong about the when. The so-called treasure of Priam he found, it didn't belong to the king from the Trojan War, not even close. So this really paints a much fuller picture of his legacy, right? On one side, his achievements are just monumental. He proved that this ancient myth was actually based on a real place, a huge Bronze Age city. He basically made archaeology cool and exciting for the whole world. But on the other side, the criticisms are pretty harsh. Turns out, his treasure is from a city that's about 1,000 years older than the Trojan War. A lot of his conclusions were driven more by wishful thinking than by hard evidence. And his digging methods, well, let's just say they were destructive. To really get the biggest criticism against him, you got to go back to that idea of stratigraphy, the layers. Remember the layer cake of cities? Well, modern archaeologists dig down so carefully, peeling back one layer at a time to preserve the whole timeline. Schliemann? And his mad dash to get to the oldest layer at the bottom, the one he wanted, he just ripped right through everything on top, destroying those younger layers forever. And this is the ultimate, almost tragic irony of his entire life's work. The actual layer he was looking for, the Troy from the time of the Trojan War, Priam's Troy, was probably one of the layers he just bulldozed right through without even realizing it. In his obsessive search for Homer's Troy, he may have actually been the one to destroy it. So, where does that leave us? What do we make of Heinrich Schliemann? Is he this visionary pioneer who brought a lost world back to life? Or is he a treasure-hunting plunderer who destroyed priceless history in his ego-driven quest? It's a tough one, and the truth, like it usually is probably floating somewhere there in the middle. But look, pioneer or plunderer, you can't deny his impact. The guy single-handedly forced the world to take a second look at its myths and legends, to see that they could be rooted in real history. He uncovered an entire lost Bronze Age civilization. And for all his massive flaws, he did something incredible. Even one of his critics had to admit he performed an incalculable service. He went looking for a storybook city, and what he found changed history forever.